Well, here we are back at NAB 2017. This is the ProVideo Coalition panel that we are now about to partake in. It's our second PVC panel at the TerraDeck booth, which we're very happy to be here. I'm Scott Simmons. I'm a editor in Nashville, Tennessee, freelance editor and the managing editor of ProVideo Coalition. And I'm happy to be here. We're going to talk a little bit more post-centric type stuff than our other panel, which is more about cameras and whatnot. But got Michael Kamas.
Hello, Scott. Good to see you.
Michael, a little bit about yourself.
I'm the Director of Technology for Key Code Media by day, and by night I put on a cape and I do the 5 Things Tech series, where I talk about 5 things and trends and reviews about things in the industry with no marketing-ish.
Good. Woody Woodhall.
Hi, Woody Woodhall, supervising sound editor, re-recording mixer, head of Los Angeles Post-Production Group, and writer of the Sound for Picture channel for ProVideo Coalition.
And you're right in the midst of 28 weeks of
28
audio
weeks of
tips.
post-audio, yeah.
What week are we on now?
I'm on week 25.
It's good. There are some really good tips in there. Originally, that was going to be like a 28 days, like a daily post, but it became so big, you put it over weeks because some of the topics, some of the articles are...
I'm doing 1,500 to 1,800 words per post, and some of the original 28 days, which you kicked that off originally, right?
Long
28
time
days
ago.
of tips,
28 days of
which
quick
are really
tips.
just a couple of paragraphs, few paragraphs with one great tip, and I'm too. I drink too much coffee, I think. So.
Well, I think when those 28 days, those 28 week posts are done, that'll be like a whole, almost like a little book on post audio. So it's really good stuff. We also have kind of a new friend to PVC, which is Graham Sheldon. He's done you're a producer and a DP, and you do a lot of work, internet writing with Cinema 5D, but you've done a few articles for PVC as well, some good topics that we hadn't been covering a lot. So a little bit about your history.
Yeah, I'm an Emmy-winning producer and director of photography. I've filmed on 6 continents for most major networks, and I've done 2 feature films. My next feature film is called The Good Catholic, and it's being released theatrically all over the United States in the fall, starring Danny Glover from Lethal Weapon days.
Very nice. Congratulations. That sounds
Thank
like
you.
a good thing. Well, we have to start talking about, I guess, the stuff we've seen during this week at the show. And I will admit, I am teaching a lot of post-production world, so I have not walked the show floor at this point on Wednesday near as much as I had in the past. Seems to me I think that seems like there's a lot more folks here for the training side of things, which I've been enjoying very much. But I can't pinpoint a topic to start off on, Michael, so let me throw it right to you.
I almost want to say blah blah cloud, blah blah collaboration, because every booth, especially
blah blah VR.
Well, VR is the cool hotness. Cloud is the corporate hotness, if there can be such a thing. But I spend a lot of my time in South Hall, both upper and lower, and it's cloud everything. Everything's being spun up in the VM. In a VM, everything's being spun up in the cloud.
What do you mean by VM?
In a virtual machine. So instead of having a single hardware unit, a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning a computer and a user, it's being used on a virtual server in the cloud, meaning someone else's server.
Okay.
And so we can have multiple OSs running on one single machine for multiple purposes. Those of you who are big Avid fans probably saw that Avid had a big push for the cloud, not only for Media Composer, but also for their asset management and their digital rights management and all their other tools that they have, they're putting in the cloud as well.
Well, there has been a Media Composer cloud product for years now. I saw the keynote and the mention of the new cloud stuff with Media Composer. What's the difference now?
Well, unfortunately, it's a symptom of changing ecosystem and unfortunate name choosing. So Media Composer Cloud used to be, I could sit at home remotely and edit footage that sat back at my data cloud, back at the 4 walls of my business, right? So you would leave where you edit and go home and sit on the couch and edit, but you're pulling media from where you work. Nowadays, what they're saying is we're going to have Media Composer spun up in the cloud, which is going to be on Microsoft's cloud. So you can actually run full instance of Media Composer up in their cloud, but it's on your local desktop in terms of viewing it.
So the Media Composer cloud of old seemed to be somewhat similar to the product Adobe Anywhere, which was also media living remotely elsewhere. I sign in from my system, many states away or whatever. But Adobe Anywhere didn't take off.
It's dead. I'm sorry, anyone out there who's been Googling it, it's one of the hottest things on my website in terms of hits, but the product is dead. It's been rolled in terms of live streaming the media from one location to another. That product has been removed. They've rolled the collaboration or project sharing, as they're calling it, into what they call team projects.
Right. Which will be a cool thing once it's out of beta.
Yeah.
So why did Media Composer Cloud, the old one, not work, and why did Adobe Anywhere not work? Why did this shift in what seemed to be the hot thing, which is to put all the media in the cloud and edit remotely elsewhere? It seems that didn't work.
Do you have $150,000 to spend?
Not today.
Not today. The old Media Composer Cloud required Interplay. And Interplay, although it started at 50, for all the bells and whistles and support, was up around 150. Adobe Anywhere, with all the servers, was 100. Plus, you had to add software and storage and asset management, and that got pretty high as well. And I think I shouldn't say both, but I think Adobe realized, you know what, we're really not catering really to that demographic. We want to be more accessible. So if we roll it into team projects and have it just as project sharing, and maybe in the future we'll offer up storage to have your media in our cloud, maybe we'll go that route. And although Adobe hasn't announced that yet, I think the writing's on the wall that at some point they'll say, look, you're paying $60 a month or whatever for Creative Cloud, but maybe for a few extra bucks you'll use some of our storage.
Yeah.
And you can start keeping media in their cloud.
So when we talked about the cloud and Adobe Anywhere and all that kind of stuff, I used to think about video files in the cloud are large and big and it's not easy. But I never heard much talk about audio in the cloud as far as like the remote editing that we did with video. And I asked this question to Woody. It seems like audio in the cloud with doing your sweetening and your editing remotely would be simple because audio files are much smaller, take much less data to stream them, if you will. Is there any of that same kind of stuff happening with audio that you've seen?
There might be. I don't really know. I literally just got here, but
you came in for the show, the Teradek show.
No,
have you seen that in the years past though? Like, has there been Pro Tools in the cloud?
Avid has been moving toward all those things for a long time, but it's really a push for music that I've seen than it is for post-production audio. So it's really about you got a drummer in Portugal and you have somebody in Iceland and whatever, and we can all collaborate and do a track together, sharing that kind of stuff. I haven't really seen that with audio post, but audio post works so much faster than what you guys do picture editing wise. I mean, I'm delivering a 90-minute special for Disney on Friday, and I've had it for 5 days. You know what I mean? So the turnaround is so quick that I don't know there's going to be any advantages. It's not like where video and you might have a lot of remote people who need to make choices or whatever. I mean, these people come into my bay and we knock it out and move on to the next whatever.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Graham, do you have any, like as a producer or a DP, two totally kind of separate things there, like, does cloud mean anything to those worlds you live in?
I think it does, Scott. As a producer, I like being able to get the most talented person for the job wherever they might be on the planet. And it varies sort of job to job, but for some of the documentary projects that I've produced, we'll get graphics out of San Francisco, we'll get music out of the United Kingdom, editing might be in New York. And I mean, for me, that's a fairly recent development within the last 3 or 4 years of being able to do that. I think you could probably do that before, but now I feel far more comfortable working with people in these sort of remote areas. I mean, I'm an LA guy, so remote for me is outside of LA.
But actually, I have a question to kind of dovetail from that. There's always been a concern amongst a lot of the creatives that collaboration and the elimination of boundaries means that work is going to start going to places where the labor is cheaper. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that as part of working with budgets and whatnot. Are you being forced because of budgets, or are you actively looking for, maybe I can hire someone from this country because the standard of living is lower?
Well, we're not going overseas. I'm not doing any very heavy graphics projects, so especially with studio pictures related to very heavy CG, they're all going overseas. So that's maybe a question for those guys. But for me, I'm able to find the most sort of talented folks, and I'm going to those guys. But on a budget side, it all comes down to, unfortunately, tax incentives.
Sure.
For me. I mean, Kentucky has great incentives, Atlanta, Georgia has great incentives, Louisville lost a lot of their incentives, and so did Michigan. So production in terms of at least independent filmmaking is going where those tax incentives are. And are the most creative people in those areas? Maybe or maybe not.
Has LA made a push to get more, or California in general made a push to put more incentives back to California? Because I know there's a lot of production that was leaving LA, and it seems like I think they were trying to get a lot of that back.
Yeah, and I think they're having a lot of success keeping productions in California specifically, but for right now, for the budgets that I work with, in terms of feature films, under $1 million. So for smaller features like that, only 5% of the total pie in California is devoted to producers like me. So it's a little skewed towards the studio system right now, but I'm hoping they'll put a little bit more money towards the indies in the future.
Well, and that's got to be extremely competitive because there's a lot of people trying to make indie movies. So I can imagine that's like just a free-for-all. It's like Thunderdome trying to get that little bit of money out there, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It all comes down to if that amount of money is capped or not. And the states where that money isn't capped, and Michigan's tax incentive program wasn't capped, everyone went to Michigan, they ran out of money. So it doesn't work for everyone, right? But yeah, California's incentive programs for feature films are capped, so hundreds of producers, you're right, vying for that 5% of the pie.
Yeah, it goes pretty quickly too, I'm sure.
It does, yeah.
We mentioned music a minute ago, and this is a little bit of a tangent. I have noticed quite a few more stock music companies on the show floor this year than I have in the past. Now, what do you deal with? A lot of probably needle drop stock music kind of stuff. Have you... And email blasts I get in my inbox, just a new stock music company, and often a new stock footage site as well. They seem to be popping up all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And the quality of it has gone through the roof. I mean, there's some really great music out there, and the whole vibe of it's changed. 15, 20 years ago, everything was synthesized. It was one person sort of orchestrating, using, eventually using samples and so on. But, nowadays you have a company like Audio Network, they're recording top musicians at Abbey Road and making all these tracks available. So yeah.
How affordable is that though when they're going to that level?
I think it's in the ballpark of, a weekend warrior who's making something for the internet maybe isn't going to buy those tracks. They might go to a more standard company that offer like something like Shutterstock that has, images and video and music and have different licensing things. I mean, that's really the sticking point for a lot of these companies is how they license out that and how they blanket it, and some of it is just out of reach for just the weekend warrior kind of person.
I think I've noticed, like, you're right, the quality of some of these sites is phenomenal, that it's like, real music. And being from Nashville, I've gone on the stock music sites looking for tracks, and I noticed, I recognize the artist's name, who's also, not a superstar, but like they're also selling their music on stock music, as well as trying to, make it in the music business. But it's the internet, that great liberator that anybody can get out and set up, a company and set up this or set up that, and it just seems like that those stock sites are just everywhere now. And of course, then you have Adobe, who's doing their own thing now. They have interface within their applications to interface with Adobe stock, which kind of like is the big elephant in the room, doing the same thing the little guy is trying to do.
Yeah.
I don't know if any of you guys have ever bought through any of these companies like Graham.
Yeah. No, I mean, we're purchasing stock music, stock footage all of the time, and you're right. It's just easier getting higher quality stuff now, and
and very specific because there's such a range. You need
didgeridoo Australia track. You got that.
I need a polka, but with only an accordion and a clarinet, or and I think the stemming out of the tracks is also really useful. So instead of just getting a stereo track of a cue, they'll give you the stems of it, so you can sort of really get in there with the producer.
Yeah.
If I just want drums here, or drop everything out except the flutes.
And there's a price range all over, and I've even seen a couple of that are like a subscription base now, where you pay the unlimited downloads of music.
So many per month kind of thing. Yeah.
It's really changed the market.
With Pond 5, they're another. I think they provide audio assets as well. They just came out with this interesting program where they're now selling, I think, something like 15,000 video assets through Adobe stock.
Yeah.
Which is
Just
interesting.
saw that, yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if we're going to see sort of a sea change there, where these companies are serving almost as agents in a way, and everything is going through Adobe stock. I mean, who knows?
Well, Avid's doing that with Marketplace, right? They've been toying with that for years, which is a kind of extensible marketplace from within Media Composer to actually purchase assets and also purchase plugins and also purchase images for that very same paradigm.
So I don't think we can talk about NAB without talking about VR. Okay, go.
I luckily yesterday got to go see a mobile production truck that has 5 companies involved with it. Supersphere is the one you probably know with Lucas Wilson.
Yep.
It's a 2D production truck, but it's completely outfitted with the entire Blackmagic workflow, Blackmagic scopes, Blackmagic cameras, etc. But in addition to doing 2D production, it also has 3D production using the Ozo cameras.
Okay.
And so
360 as opposed to like 3D glasses on,
Right. And so what they're doing is they're doing the 3D production, but within that within the 360 space, they're putting 2D images as well. So if you're watching a band, let's say, you can now get a close-up in 2D in that 360 space of a close-up. Or if we're watching sports, you can now get fantasy stats. Wow. So it's very interesting to see this kind of mix of 2D and 360 all in one mobile production rig.
I still wonder, and there's a lot of VR stuff as you walk around the show, and you see a few more headset, in booths than I remember last year. But how many people are consuming VR? I mean, any of you guys consuming VR?
Well, so I'm torn, right? Because I have that producer/DP hyphen. So from a producer perspective, I'm still not sure how I can monetize VR. And then from a DP perspective, it seems like more of an IT professional should be shooting this, right? Because for me, you plop it in the room, and then you hire someone who's directed theater, or you do live events. So I don't know. I'd love to find a way to make money shooting 360 video.
I think the people I know that are doing it, I mean, they're having a good time with it. It's some really challenging stuff. There's a challenge of how to tell the stories. There's a challenge of how to deal with audio. How do you cue the viewer to look where? But I selfishly think about what is my experience with it, and it's mainly, I have a couple of little kids, and we have a little cardboard thing that you put your phone in, that every now and then, something pops up that I think they might like, or even that I might like. You pop the phone in it, you watch it for 2 or 3 minutes, you usually don't seem to get to the end of the production, and you take it out and you go on about your day, which is fine and fun, but I don't know if that,
I think that's the issue, right? I mean, how do we lick the storytelling of VR? Because if we want to watch a movie, right, but it could be whatever we choose it to be, I think that's the thing that nobody's licked yet, and why it's sort of a novelty. I'd hate to say that. Did I say that word out loud?
You can certainly
because
say
there's
it.
a
Now,
lot
if
of
they
people
pelt
here
you with the rotten fruit and vegetables out there, that's on
we have
you.
a glass cube around us.
Oh,
I think we're
thank God.
protected
Oh, wow,
from
there comes
fruit and
one.
veggies.
I think one of the things we're missing, or I should say missing, but we have several competing factors. Obviously, there's the fact that you're wearing a headset. The second part is that we're still in the infancy of VR. If I'm not mistaken, what they anticipate being the standard is at one point 16K per eye. Right, we're at about 2K per eye at best.
Yeah, in your field of view.
And what's the frame rate we're dealing with? Right there, it's been suggested that it be upwards around 140 frames, give or take. So we're magnitudes away of where we should be to make it truly immersive. And I think the fact that you get that screen door effect when you're watching something kind of takes you out of it. And of course, the headset obviously is always going to be an issue until that gets rectified.
Well, headsets are going to have to become, super cheap. They're going to have to be like just, you can go into your convenience store and pick up a headset that's decent before, I think we have to have something like that before it ends up going mainstream. But maybe this is a technology, or this is a portion of the media creation storytelling world we live in, that we will have many years to figure it all out before it becomes mainstream. If you think about, like, 3D never became mainstream, but HD, we had a couple of years of HD, and then suddenly everybody had HD sets.
Yeah.
Now when you go buy a set, you're buying a 4K set.
Right.
Another year or two, finally, that'll be broadcast, and we'll get it streaming over bigger pipes. But yeah, maybe it's just going to be many years of setup before VR finally hits, which is probably not a bad thing for the longevity.
Well, I
of
read
it.
an article somewhere about there was medical applications where somebody retrained moving their legs by using one of these devices. So there might be other applications beyond what we do,
Yeah.
storytelling, and that's a really deep thing, right? To sort of rearrange all the neutrons in your brain to say, oh yeah, that's the way legs work, and then,
Yeah, that's
so-
the whole augmented reality thing. That a lot
Right.
of people who, scholars on the subject say that, yeah, the AR is where it's really going. The VR is just kind of a little bit of a novelty, but the AR is where it's going to take off.
Right.
Audio mixing in VR, we all hear talk of ambisonic mixing.
Yeah.
Explain that.
I don't know a darn thing about it, to be honest with you. People always ask me about that, and I have not mixed any of that work, but I would assume that it's just a series of tracks just like we always do, and somewhere in there, like you were saying, some IT person, some coder has to say, this is here, this is here, this is there, because in my world it's still left, center, right,
Yeah.
left surround, right surround. So now if somebody turns their head, I mean, I don't know that they've turned their head in my bay of something I delivered a month ago. So there has to be something in the software. Maybe you know more. Do you know more about that?
Yeah, it's recording it as data more than it is just
Yeah.
our traditional WAV
Right.
files. And what it's doing is the algorithm that is saving it is then communicating with the headset. So when you turn your head, the audio is then being routed in the space it was recorded in its data.
Right.
If you look at like Dolby Atmos,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
And that's object-oriented audio. And
Right.
you can do somewhat of the same thing, which is not just moving it to left, center, right, center, center, but saying, I want it at this space in XYZ.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a startup company called Osic X. I don't know if you've heard of those guys. They're doing similar sort of ideas around 360 audio because if you center channel left right and then something's behind you as someone experiencing the headset, I don't know to
I
turn
around and
I don't know that unless
it's no
right.
longer a surround and now it's center.
Right.
You know what I mean?
But I
So-
think that's got to be imperative if you are using the 360 space, because what's the point of having
Oh, yeah.
360 if you can't give cues to look behind
Absolutely.
you?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, yeah.
Door
but so-
knocking or a cough. What?
anything
Yeah.
gigantic monster about to step on
Yeah,
you. Yeah, I
right.
mean, and it does give the audience more control over the story than I like sometimes as a photographer, right? Because I mean, the best scene in the world could be happening here, and they could be looking at the sound cue behind them. So,
But wouldn't that be the exact opposite? As a storyteller, you'd be able to coordinate both visual and audio to help tell your story, so you can have that audio be the cue for the visual thing that you're shooting.
yeah, coming back though, now the audio guy is the top of the totem pole, not the DP anymore, though. You know.
You know what? I think, Woody, you can pretty much say
You
that
okay
that's
with
never
that?
going to happen.
I'm never going to be at the top of the
No.
totem pole. But I know, I was here a couple of years ago and I was talking with Dolby. They had just announced that they were teching through the Standards Commission AC4, which was going to be able to stream Dolby Atmos. And then the guy was sort of geeking out to me about how eventually people can, if they don't want to hear the announcer, they can turn off the announcer. And if they only want to hear the puck on the ice, if they're watching a hockey game, they'll be able to do that. And I'm like, how do we deliver that?
Right.
So I'm going to deliver you 24 tracks of audio that'll all play in real time, that the end user is going to
Toggle
mix,
on and off. Yeah.
Well, think about, remember when DVDs came along, the promise of the multi-audio channels where you could, listen to director commentary, which
Right.
kind of happened, but I don't think that ever really took off. DVDs at one point was going to have the multi-video angle thing. That never really took off. You had broadcast with secondary audio programming channels that were supposed to deliver extra content. That never took off. It seems to be just, the Spanish now. It's like there's always these great little things that come along.
Whenever I do seminars about surround, I always ask the audience, how many people in this room right now at your house have a 5.1 surround system, that you regularly use? Well, first of all, I ask how many people have it, and let's say out of 40 people, maybe 8. or they'll have a sound bar, which
Yeah.
sort of defeats the purpose, but I don't want to get into that with them. Oh, I have a sound bar. Well, that's not really surrounding you, is it? But and then I'll say, okay, now the question is, so those of you who do have this, how many use it on a regular basis? And then it's nobody. And then, because, I mean, what's the truth? The truth is you're in a house. You have a window here, you have a door there, you got a closet there, you got a shelf here. And, there is a very specific array that you need to do, and there's a sweet spot for the viewer, and it's really hard to achieve at home. There's an endless push toward the surround stuff, but, I do mix a lot of television, and scripted or unscripted television that I deliver is mostly stereo still.
I think that goes back to the idea that the people at home are way behind what we who come to NAB think they are, or the people that manufacture the stuff think they are. That most everybody's got an HD TV in their home now, but most people, I say most, but a lot of people still are not watching HD from their Comcast or their Cox cable or their Charter connection.
Or it's crunched down to the point where you're not really seeing a lot of benefit of the HD
So now
signal.
we're selling 4K TVs when you go to Best Buy, and it's like, they're not even on HD, so they're not going to get to 4K. But so speaking of 4K transition, it was said in the last year or so or two that 8K is the new standard. I'm not really seeing that. Obviously, you're not going to buy most cameras you're going to walk out of here and buy are probably going to be shooting 4K at least, but I haven't seen the big push to 8K yet, or 16K. I don't know if you guys have, from a storage standpoint, Michael, you're going to need a lot more storage for 8K and 16K. So are people coming to you saying, I'm shooting 8K, send me 8K storage?
Obviously, there's the folks who are shooting RED, and RED obviously has varying degrees of raster sizes, whether it be 4K, 6K, etc. But I haven't had one client that says, I'm shooting 8K. I need storage for 8K. No.
I think maybe it is some of the VR applications where, some of the fringe things like, event or trade show type of productions they seem to always be the first one to get to those big milestones of more Ks and more.
But there's something to, if we're relating this to storage, as you know, raster size doesn't dictate storage size, right? You can have an 8K H.264 and have that at a smaller bit rate than HD ProRes.
But if you're shooting a whole production at 8K, that's obviously going to take way more than 4K.
Completely.
I don't know if it's 4 times as much, but we always talk about storage at NAB, and every year when I walk around, I see new booths from storage companies I'd never heard of before. Some of those booths are quite large, and the next year I may not see that booth again. At least that I remember. Yeah. Is that still? How are there so many storage companies that pop up all the time and then go away? Because
it's really easy to buy a chassis from someone. It's really easy to go out and buy a stack of drives from someone, slam it together, put your logo on it, and say, I made storage, right? And that's what we call a JBOD, just a bunch of storage, right? There's not a lot of intelligence behind it. It's just max capacity, as big a drives as we can put in there, and then connect it to a fat pipe. And I'm anti that. They tend to get traction in the marketplace by saying we're cheaper than this name brand or this name brand. Well, there's a reason. Those name brands have been doing this for 10, 15, 20 years, have R&D, have their own file systems, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why you're seeing a lot of these end up phasing out, because they can't keep up with that kind of innovation, nor are they really servicing the collaborative needs a lot of the community out there.
Well, when you talk about storage, often the big storage companies that we recognize, they have media asset management options on top of just the spinning drives to hold it. Is that what keeps an edit share still around after all these years?
It's funny because if I put on my Keycode Media hat, a lot of times we find storage manufacturers who are just looking for the checkbox. They're looking at their competitors and they say, oh, that one has asset management, that one has asset management. We should have asset management, right? I don't want to call Avid out on this, but Avid, has their enterprise asset management, but they didn't have anything that was more consumer prosumer. So they went with Axle, which is a great asset management system, and they bundled it with their hardware. But Axle doesn't run on their hardware. Axle runs on a Mac. So it was kind of like, checkbox, we have asset management now, great, but it didn't really interop with it that well. But a lot of the more commonplace storage systems, whether we look at SNS, we look at Facilis, look at EditShare, look at Avid, they all have some kind of asset management. And so when you are comparing each asset management, each storage system to one another, you can kind of see, well, okay, I am at least getting that checkbox in each one.
Nothing more exciting to talk about than asset management and storage.
The least sexiest thing
It is
in the
by far.
space, even storage, is
but
asset management.
there are booths all over with that in there.
Yep.
But Graham, as a producer, we were talking about this before we came on here. Like, producers don't come to NAB to look at producer stuff because NAB's a bunch of gear nerds.
What is producer stuff, though?
I don't know. It's everything.
Is there any producer
Is it
stuff
spiral
in NAB?
notebooks? So,
I don't know what producer stuff is. I mean, producer stuff is whatever it takes to get the thing made and, you know, and out there, you know.
But as a producer, though, I mean, you're also a DP as well, but, you know, producers spend money.
Yeah.
So you're walking around with your eye, on your producer eye, at like, you know, what is this new, you know, there's a lot, as we sit here in Central Hall, I look out and I see a lot of companies that are making support gear for cameras, cages, you know, arms, and there's a few well-known ones that we see a lot, but then I walk around, I see ones that I've never heard of, kind of like storage. I mean, are you looking for that type of thing?
I mean, look, constantly I'm signing checks, right, for these larger projects, and I have investors to answer to, and the majority of the risk is on myself and the investors, right? So I'm walking around here and I see a techno crane. And if someone in Los Angeles is telling me the day rate on a techno crane is $9,000 and I'm here talking to the makers of techno crane and they say, well, it's $4,000 if you go here, that's very valuable information for me. Because, you know, we talk a little bit about jargon sometimes, you know, and I'm the guy in the suit on occasion, and that's the perfect time to use jargon, right? The guy's right there. This costs $700 a day. And I say, no, it doesn't. I was at NAB last week and it doesn't cost that. I can buy one for $700. And then they kind of sit there and they get a little nervous, and then great, the budget is better served, and I put as much on screen as possible versus on storage drives.
So with that being said, you're saying that producers need to come to NAB and walk around and look at stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And wear a suit.
And wear a suit. I mean, I don't know, whatever your look is, but yeah, producers should be coming to NAB. They should be asking questions. They should understand the technology that's required to make major feature films, at least at a level where they can talk about it with professionals like you guys.
Do you know of the producers that are coming to NAB? Like, do most of them come, or do most of them not come?
Wow, you know, I mean, local 600's having groups here. All the tech guys are having groups. I am a member of the Producers Guild, and I have not been invited to one Producer Guild luncheon, so I don't know. Maybe I'm the only producer at NAB right now. Who knows?
Well,
Hi, everyone.
Let's talk about Blackmagic a little bit. They came out with Resolve 14s, went from 12.5 to 14. Fairlight, the big addition. I think one of the biggest.
Is,
yeah,
you know,
there's no 13th floor on my hotel.
Exactly.
So the people on 12, you know, or people on 14. I want to ask about Fairlight because I know it as the many years that I've worked in Nashville, sending audio mixes. A couple of times it's gone to someone who's using Fairlight, and I think about that as a humongous board in a nice room. I don't think about it as being, a little piece of software that it can mix audio.
Well, Blackmagic acquired the intellectual property and the hardware from Fairlight, and so now they've incorporated it into Resolve 14, and it's really nice. I mean, it's just beginning, but right out of the box, what they're offering is natively from your own computer. It really depends on the power of that computer, but so there's no arbitrary restriction on tracks. So it's not like you only get 128 tracks. It's whatever your computer can do. You get 6 inserts per channel.
What do you mean by inserts? What are inserts?
Plug-in filters, EQ, whatever it is.
So track-based effects in a sense.
And built into that are the Fairlight EQ, the Fairlight compressor expander gate. They have some really nice stuff that's just straight out of the box. But the thing about it that's really nice is it has a really extensive busing scheme. It has professional metering, so it's going to actually have a ITU 1773, which is the LKFS reading that we need for broadcast. It's going to have a true peak meter instead of a sample peak meter. who cares? What's the difference? About 3 dB. So all those guys in NLEs who are mixing to -1, something I talk about in my 28 days, I think in one of my posts, are really pushing beyond -1, depending on how they're pushing that audio. And I did a seminar for a group recently, and I listened to a bunch of their stuff. They have their own web channel, and some of it was really crunchy. And I was asking, which one of you guys is? And I said, how do you mix your stuff? And he says, oh yeah, I mix everything as close as I can to the top. And I said, do you come from analog days where you're peaking the red on a VU meter? It's not even remotely the same. So the fact that they're coming right out of the box and saying, we're going to provide you with professional equipment, they're going to accept VST plugins, they're going to accept, on the Mac side, they're going to accept any AU audio unit plugins, and they're also coming out with an accelerator card that brings the latency down to 14 samples, I believe, which is pretty amazing. And that card is going to, they've announced it, but it doesn't exist at the moment, or they're not talking about it yet, but they are coming out with a hardware I/O box as well. The question I had for them was regarding their services, which are amazing. As you said, you walk into a bay with Fairlight consoles, and it's very impressive looking. They're beautiful hardware. They are not going to entertain any other surfaces than Fairlight surfaces. So there's not going to be any other protocols like the EU or the Yukon that's used by Avid for Pro Tools.
Kind of like Resolve only works with for your hardware monitor connections only works with Blackmagic hardware.
Yeah.
But now, as it sits right now, if you take the beta that came out on Monday and you hook it up to you download it, install it, and you've got Blackmagic, Ultra Scope or an Ultra Studio, something like that, you can now go to the Fairlight tab of Resolve and do all your mixing. So is it sort of like a Pro Tool, and I'm not talking hardware at all, not the big services, but just the software that kind of lets you change your levels and look at your waveforms and all that. Is it sort of like a version of Pro Tools now in its own little page in Resolve? Is it that powerful and that
It's
big?
It's a full-on mixer. You can go up to 1,000 tracks. They said if you use their accelerator card, and it's fully customizable. It does 7.1 right out of the box. It's pretty impressive, and they also showed me the interface with one of their surfaces, one of the control surfaces. And again, they're sort of thinking ahead, whereas on a lot of control surfaces, your faders come to you as a bank, and so you're banking them 8 at a time, which if you're doing a large session and you have splits of music here and you have sound effects and you have 30 dialogue tracks, it can be very difficult to constantly end up banking it. Well, he showed me they have a thing where you can set 48 at a time,
Wow.
which is really nice.
So before the Fairlight integration, Resolve already had audio mixing. You had a mixer and track mixer and a clip mixer, if I remember correctly. This looks like this is just adding, the ultimate audio.
Blackmagic has definitely always been pushing ahead from the beginning. All the acquired companies that they've gotten are really top of the line stuff, starting with Resolve. They acquired DaVinci, Terranex, Fairlight,
Fusion.
Fusion. Yeah, there's some really smart people over there, and with all since everything is market based, I think they're doing a lot of right stuff. And there's a lot of companies out there that have been around for a long time. That if I was looking at Blackmagic, I might be sweating a little bit, particularly now that they're really incorporating audio. And they, 12 that they really went forward with picture editing.
Absolutely. And
So
I think
they've gone beyond the color to the picture editing.
Yeah.
Now they have and I'm just about to start a feature film that was cut on Resolve.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know that they've introduced some training that they're doing in NAB this year. They're starting a whole different type of training and certification programs and all that kind of stuff. So you're really right. There is a whole push beyond just what it used to be. Blackmagic had a couple of weeks before NAB, they had a live stream where they introduced the new Ursa Mini Pro. They introduced the smaller control surface consoles. Big announcements. And I think everyone was a little bit surprised when they did that before NAB, and we thought, oh my gosh, whatever's going to hit at NAB is going to just be mind-blowing. But, it was the Resolve 14. It wasn't anything mind-blowing. It was just interesting that they chose to do that release before NAB when they've always done it at NAB.
Right.
We see Adobe, they're announcing their updates before NAB and releasing this year before NAB. You've got Sony having announcements before NAB and a lot of the camera manufacturers. What does that say about the relevance of NAB? Or does that say anything about the relevance of NAB?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make it easier for folks like us to cover NAB. I will say that. I understand from a brand perspective, they're worried that their big release of the Ursa Mini Pro will get lost amongst all the other cameras. I get that. But we have to have some big announcements out here, or we're also not going to get the entire international media to come out to NAB. So it's a give and take. Not everyone's going to want to fly to that special Blackmagic event, wherever it is, to look at the Ursa Mini Pro. So I'd like to see more big announcements coming back to NAB personally.
I don't think that's going to be the case moving forward. I think folks have realized that we can dictate our own pace, and not that I want to, relate everything to the mothership that is Apple. But Apple pulled out from trade shows years ago, saying we're going to do stuff at our own pace. That way, we can align our sales, our marketing, namely our engineering too, to make sure that what we say we're going to do actually comes out on time. And I think there is a stigma. The joke around NAB is announce at NAB, ship at IBC. Right? Because stuff is never ready to go. So I think there's something to be said for not only separating yourself from the herd and being heard without being lost in the white noise, but also aligning all your different business divisions so when you do make the announcement, you're ready to hit the ground running.
Speaking of pulling out of NAB, of course, Red's not here this year. They're always a huge booth right next to Blackmagic that would have any kind of number of crazy demos going on. Autodesk. Not here. Was Autodesk here last year? I think they were last year. The Foundry, I believe, has not been here for the last couple of years. I walked through the plug-in pavilion, and the plug-in pavilion, it used to be, all these little plug-ins that we use in our NLEs for the most part. Small manufacturers, one-man shops. Walked through there this year, and there's only like a couple of actual names that I recognize. I didn't recognize, hardly anybody in the plug-in pavilion. I don't even know if they're still calling it the plug-in pavilion.
I think NAB, I always see NAB as being sort of aspirational more than, of course there's always going to be a solid announcement because that's what they're paying big money to be here for, but there's always the backroom stuff of, hey, these are technologies we're working on, this is stuff that we really want to, and they people like us who are working professionals, they want to get a read and say, is this an avenue we should be going toward? Right. Or do you see a feasibility in us moving in that direction? So there's always going to be a place for NAB for that because this is their chance to get to talk to just a consumer, to talk to a professional, and then get that feedback.
Well, as some people have been pulling out of NAB, and I think superficially you would maybe just say, well, it feels like there's not as many people here this year as there was last year. I don't know. I saw an attendance number announced. I don't know how the numbers compare. But in general, people think like, well, the age of the internet, we don't need trade shows. All of us that come still believe that the best part is the personal communication and the parties and just the hanging out and the conversations we have. But Avid, on the other hand, a couple of years ago decided, let's have our own little trade show before the trade show, which seems to go against all that we're talking about as far as trade shows not being relevant. I didn't attend Avid Connect this year. Michael, you did.
Yes.
What's the thoughts on Avid's trade show before a trade show?
Well, I don't know if calling it a trade show is the most apropos term because the folks that are there are part of the Avid family, the Avid Alliance partners. It's called the ACA, the Avid Connect, and I think it serves many purposes, but one of the main purposes is that Avid users are a family, and we all belong together, and we should all talk and share experiences, and also give feedback to Avid on what may be right, what may be wrong. One of the things that Avid had at Connect was they had the user base vote and actually submit what needs to be improved, what should we work on, and the purist in me wants to believe that was from a place of, yes, we want to do what our users want and not just what looks good, but all the things that were said that needed to be done were things that people have been clamoring for years. So my hope is that at this trade show, it's not only as a kumbaya, come together, but it's also a let's improve the product, let's improve the ecosystem together that you can't do at a 100 by 100 booth on the show floor.
That's a good point, and the voting was that I saw was on features of Media Composer, and they showed a slide that said background saving and live timeline. Possibly, I don't know which one, but there's some stuff on that slide that said possibly coming in April or in the fall, and there were some that were under investigation. There were some that planned release later in the year or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I thought that was pretty, I said kudos to Avid for showing that, because basically they're showing you the development roadmap that, Apple doesn't do. Adobe kind of has a little here and there, but not really.
They're a public company, right? So there's not a lot they can say because they can't.
But they said
shares.
way more, just talking about NLE software development. They said way more in that slide than any other NLE maker has ever said that I've ever seen.
Can I say something that may be slightly inflammatory? I'm not saying this just for inflammatory.
Please.
Avid, as a public company, has to file with the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission. And they released their latest document to shareholders and whatnot earlier this week. And they took a look at the market space and said, where's there the most upside? Where's the most potential? And number one was digital rights management. And somewhere underneath that was media asset management. And then there was storage. And at the very bottom.
Somewhere
in
in
the
the
very
fine
bottom,
print, editing, and then way smaller is audio.
And I hope, that was such a small section, they didn't even have a heading for it. No, the audio editing was on there. But
thank God.
Two of the lowest three, if I'm not mistaken, headings were color grading and nonlinear editing. And they showed that nonlinear editing, they only saw a 4% market growth. So, and 0% was color grading. Well, and so sorry to interrupt, but when I look at that, and then I think of why most people think of Media Composer, which is the creative editorial, those don't align. And with the announcement of partnering with Microsoft, it kind of gives a lot of pause as to what the future may hold when they're seeing opportunity in a completely separate part of the industry.
I think you're right, and a lot of editors who, like myself, who spend time in the NLE, we think of Avid as being Media Composer, and we're upset when they're not developing. We're upset when the keynote happens, they don't mention Media Composer. But the reality is right, that it is a small fraction of the whole company in itself. Avid would rather sell you an iSys than sell you a license of Media Composer. Plain and simple, I think. Apple, Final Cut is a small part of their business, but they're putting resources behind it because they see what it drives in the rest of the business. I think Avid does the same with Media Composer because they want you using Media Composer because then you may be using their storage. But at Avid Connect last year, they showed Adobe running on the Nexus. So they would also like you to buy their storage and run Premiere as long as you buy their storage. I think that's kind of the reality of a lot of these companies is that, it's whatever's going to make the money. What's going to make the money. Adobe has their own sort of trade show, Adobe Max, so it's not unheard of to have a trade show outside of NAB. So there's that as well. So just about done. We're going to wrap this up here. What are we going to see at NAB next year? What's 2018 got? Any thoughts?
I'd like to see even cheaper cinema glass. Yeah, for me.
Woody?
Good stuff.
The second
period.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, there was a period there.
Michael, what do you think?
I'm hoping to see a greater HDR standard without all these different HDR standards, and brighter television sets that adhere to HDR standards, so it's much easier to create HDR content and view HDR content.
We didn't even talk about HDR. I hope to see anything that helps me get jobs done faster and out the door quicker and on to the next job. And maybe next year I'll wear a sport coat.
If not, I can let you one.
Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
All right.